It's my pleasure to welcome and thank Chief Billy Morin for offering his time and knowledge today. Chief Morin was elected as the youngest chief in the history of Enoch Cree Nation at the age of 28 back in 2015. Now in his third term, his most important accomplishments include revitalizing Cree language and culture, prioritizing youth education and empowerment, and catalyzing Enoch's exponential economic development to diversify the nation's businesses. In 2020, Chief Morin was elected by the other 16 chiefs of Treaty 6 to represent them as Grand Chief of the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations for a one-year term. Chief Morin, thank you so much for sharing with us today, and I will now pass it over to you.
Nanaskamaw Laura, Katamska Tinawao Gakyao, Nuwaku Maganak, Wapikyo Egwa, White Eagle Egwa, Nahtoki Topi, Sacred Rider, Billy Morin Nitsigason is my name. Muskeg Si Ochi Enoch Cree Nation is where I'm from. And I just bring greetings on behalf of my nation and my family to all of my relations. Just thank Laura for that awesome introduction. And I will say that I'm a proud Edmontonian as well, and a proud member. Well, I'm actually not a member, so I feel a little bit guilty today that I'm not an official member. But after today, I will definitely become a member because I am living in the Lessard Community League, and I jog by that community hall about 2 times a week. So now I have more than enough incentive to join and be a part of the organization as well as just an Edmontonian. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. I'm going to jump into a presentation today. I don't have a huge spiel. I really love when I get asked questions and it becomes more of a conversation. So just want to get through the information and share a little bit more visual on top of the awesome job that Laura explained from Saskatoon, where this precedent has already been set from other cities across Western Canada. So I'm just going to jump into the presentation. Can we see this? Thumbs up, Laura.
Looks good.
Okay. I'm just going to minimize this. So about urban reserves, and today I'm presenting to the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues and Chief Billy Morin. There are no urban reserves in Edmonton. As Laura mentioned, there's several in Saskatoon, and they've existed since the late 80s, early 90s. There's some in Winnipeg, there's some in Regina, there's some in other smaller municipal urban centers across Western Canada. So let's talk about urban reserves. We're going to go through a little bit more in detail what an urban reserve is, why we want to walk down this path of creating urban reserves in the city of Edmonton. And I'm wearing this t-shirt today, or this sweater, and it's my Treaty 6 sweater that I got for one of the employees who used to work with me as a present. And what this sweater actually really means at the end of the day is treaty is just all about being good neighbors. So of course, that's what we really want to highlight, especially since our audience is the community leagues. So what is an urban reserve? I'm going to read this off verbatim and add a little bit more context to it, okay? So an urban reserve is First Nations reserve that reside inside or next to an urban center. So Enoch Cree Nation is next to the city of Edmonton. We've already actually always existed even before the city of Edmonton. So the word urban kind of throws people off depending if you're First Nation or you're an Edmontonian. At the end of the day, what it just really speaks to is that top thing there, that top sentence there without a bullet. You're a First Nation reserve recognized by the federal government, and you're either right by a big city or a small municipality, or you're not, or you're within it. Another example is the Tsuut'ina Nation next to Calgary, very much the Enoch Cree Nation equivalent same as Calgary. So we have a nice rivalry there with my friends and relations at Tsuut'ina. We both bug each other about the Elks and the Oilers and the Flames. So very much similar situation there in Calgary. They've existed prior to Calgary. So we actually became natural kind of urban reserves, for lack of a better word. We always existed here, and then the city kind of came actually closer to us. And then there's a kind of a third way of doing urban reserves, and that's really been the new way over the last 30 or 40 years, and that's land acquisition that you can say was a part of the province jurisdiction or part of the city municipality jurisdiction, and the First Nation acquires it. So Yellow Quill First Nations Bank of Canada, downtown Saskatoon. I don't know if they got the reserve status recognized for this particular one, but I'm going to say they did, because if they didn't, they're pretty close. Quite simply that's the headquarters there with the mural on the side of it of First Nations Bank across Canada, a small bank across Western Canada. And the headquarters there, the land that it sits on, that's the reserve. That's the First Nation. Just quite simply that city block with the, probably less than the whole block itself. I don't know if the parking lot is a part of the reserve, but the building definitely is. And that's the reserve. Yellow Quill owns it, and they work in partnership with the city to do business and commerce there. So, you know, I think a lot of people have ideas of what urban reserves look like. They don't all look the same. I'm going to show you the one that we're proposing as the first one in Edmonton. It's not going to look anything like that. But often, again, as we'll see throughout this presentation, it's kind of just another part of the city, for lack of a better word. It can be any type of development compatible with neighbors. So housing, retail, offices, education, services, green space. So we just saw it with Yellow Quill there. It's an office building. Quite frankly, even before it became a reserve, it was an office building. And then they just converted the title of the plot there to reserve status. So it just stayed the same, basically. There are subtle differences in just the operation of it, but we'll touch on those in a bit. Reserve creation process is multi-year and is run by Indigenous Services Canada with input from the city and province. So this is one where people too are really kind of, how do you even get an urban reserve? Who makes that determination? Who makes the final call? How long does it take? Is Billy going to get an urban reserve and turn the whole Collingwood neighborhood into Enoch rather than Edmonton? No, that's not happening at all. So it takes years. It literally takes years. Like, this doesn't happen overnight, and there's a whole bunch of consultation with Edmontonians. Let's skip in the Edmonton context. There would be a whole bunch of consultation with Edmontonians. There are 4 levels of government that you have to deal with. So our federal and provincial governments right now are not seeing eye to eye. Imagine getting 2 more levels of government involved in this process. But so it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes teamwork, and it takes cross collaboration. At the end of the day, I would say it's scary. It's scary. I get it. It's the unknown, but the work has to be put in to bring the people along, Edmontonians, First Nations, whoever that might be, who's acquiring the land, and they have to move forward together, and it just takes time in a good way. Communities are consulted before creating a new reserve. So both communities, the First Nations community, the community leagues, the local Edmontonians, City Hall bureaucracy has to be involved. So that's really what's happening in a really, really early phase right now in the City of Edmonton. So earlier this spring, my awesome city councillor, Sarah Hamilton, really kind of just took the bull by the horns. I was glad she did. And she made a motion that the City of Edmonton will develop an urban reserve strategy. So what that quite frankly means is tomorrow, Edmonton's not after, they're not going to grant an urban reserve tomorrow. What it is from the city perspective, since they've never done it before, is let's go talk to Saskatoon and see what they do. Let's go talk to the federal government and see what they do. Let's go talk to the provincial government and see what they do. And by the way, let's go talk to planning and fire and policing. And everybody has to have a say in this. So let's just get the ball rolling on what would that look like in the City of Edmonton. So that's where the City of Edmonton's at. I did see kind of a final draft on urban reserve strategies from the City of Edmonton. So hopefully it goes in front of City Council soon. And of course, that'll be a public process as well to disclose what the strategy would be. So there's about 120 urban reserves across Canada. Some are naturally urban reserves. Some have been land acquisition. So community additions, the First Nation buys land with own source funds. Just like a developer, there are actually a lot of First Nations that own land in the city and own businesses in the city and own property in the city, that just none of them are actual reserve status. So in theory, if they can change it into reserve status over, it'd take a few years, and they just bought the land with their own source revenue. And then there's a different way actually too. It's called treaty land entitlement, and Laura kind of referred to it a little bit in her opening comment, which was Gaias a long time ago when we were first creating reserves with the Crown and federal government. The amount of land that First Nations got for a reserve was based on population. And so some reserves, especially in Saskatchewan, this has been a big thing, more so than Alberta, is a lot of First Nations were shorted land because the census that they took was a smaller population amount, so they got a smaller amount of land for a larger amount of people. So there have been processes called treaty land entitlement settlements, where 100 years later, they've recognized as a federal government that, yes, we shorted you land according to treaty, and let's figure out how to add to the reserve land. And that doesn't happen overnight either. That takes a little while. So lots of First Nations in Saskatchewan are acquiring land in this way. Less in Alberta for whatever reason. Why urban reserves? So, you know, I'll read these off and I'll touch a little bit on them some more. Sovereignty, you know, you hear this a lot, nation to nation, First Nation. First Nations have their own rights and rules. Of course, we live under the auspices of the Indian Act, probably a little bit too much, but that's a different story for another day. And then, of course, we have treaty. Of course, if you don't know where treaties are, here's the map of Alberta. The top half is green, that's Treaty 8. The middle portion there is Treaty 6, that's where we all live in Treaty 6. And the bottom portion there is Treaty number 7. And then all the numbers are actually the different First Nations across Alberta. So there's, I think, 46 First Nations in Alberta. Some of these are repetitive because different First Nations have different land bases in close proximity to each other. So Enoch Cree Nation is number 29 there, closest to the City of Edmonton. And we've always existed throughout Treaty 6, but our land as a First Nations reserve, recognized by the federal government, was created in about 1885 before the City of Edmonton. All the reserves around the City of Edmonton were created before the city itself. 36 and 40, maybe a little bit later because they signed treaty later. That's the Sunchild and Ochees First Nation. But this just gives you some visual context of where the First Nations are across that have always existed for a really, really long time across the province. One I want to touch on here, because there's so many words. Again, I mentioned nation to nation, reconciliation, which I really believe in. My mentor is Willie Littlechild. I'm very lucky to have him, and his new word that I steal is reconciliation. I like reconciliation better. So many words used out there these days in good ways. I really believe in reconciliation today. But the one I also like is self-determination, even more so than sovereignty or self-government. Because from the First Nations perspective, a lot of the times, because there's so much hurt and distrust, a lot of our older people and younger people kind of going through a little bit of a reconciliation within themselves and within communities right now. And a lot of distrust is built up. And like from the First Nations perspective, the pushback I would get on such initiatives for urban reserve land acquisition from the First Nations itself would be, you know, like, we don't trust the government. Why do we have to ask for land back? Let's just go take it. We're owed that land in the first place. We cannot sign anything with the city because we feel like we're selling our right short or we're giving up treaty. And I get where they're coming from. But I really love that word self-determination because I think it actually props up rights. It props up sovereignty. Self-government too as well, but that one I don't really use as much. But sovereignty and rights I do use. But I like self-determination because the definition in my eyes of treaty is working together. And treaty can never be broken, but I'm kind of rambling on here, but I'm gonna finish in just a sec because I really love self-determination in terms of it's my choice and it's our choices as a First Nation to work with Edmontonians. It's our choice to work with Albertans. It's our choice to work with Canadians. It doesn't make us any less sovereign. It doesn't take away from our rights. We do it because we are sovereign. We choose it, and that makes us sovereign. So the right to choose really makes us sovereign, and that's what I really like about the First Nation perspective, and that's the kind of the messaging I put out there to even the naysayers on the First Nation side. So there's unique priorities with any First Nation. My wife is from number 5 there in high level, so she's Dene, and they have way different needs than Enoch Cree Nation, who's just right by the city of Edmonton, right? So every First Nation is unique, and they're different tribes too. So we got Dene, Saulteaux, Ojibwe, Blackfoot, Stoney Nakoda, Métis, a whole bunch of other First Nations. They're unique. The last bullet there is true. There's a reserve acquisition in Urban First Nation in Fort Capel, Saskatchewan. All the actual tribes in the treaty area own that small piece of property together, and they house their tribal organizations there. So that's really cool. So it doesn't have to be just one that owns one, but as like with any government, it's a little bit tougher to get different First Nations to work together in that regard. But maybe that'll happen in Edmonton too. So why urban reserves? You know, the social aspect side of this is improve access to housing, food services, education, recreation, strengthen connections to community, create social, political, and business capital. I'm gonna rattle these off and then touch on them a little bit more. Cultural use and protect culturally significant sites, burial grounds, ceremonial, historical, archaeological, and promote independence. And planning, add land to improve the functioning of an existing reserve, opportunity for urban or redevelopment of innovation, improve services for First Nation members. The top one I'm going to touch on. And you might think last year, Camp Pekawewin. And, you know, the city has some awesome initiatives, and there's some really great organizations, and the city itself is a leader in tackling homelessness and poverty, ending poverty, and poverty Edmonton. And there's no one fix to poverty, but I really do believe that this discussion about urban reserves can be one of the solutions moving forward. So I thought about Camp Pekawewin, and that was a special site where there's a traditional burial ground down there, and it's a historical site even for the city of Edmonton, where Fort Edmonton used to be, and it's right there in the river valley close to downtown. It's a really special site, and the camp was set up there, and you know, that camp wasn't going to last forever. And the city did a great job with the expo center. But what's the real solution? Again, there's no one real solution, but can an urban reserve lend its hand towards a plot in the city that just kind of does supports for Indigenous people in a little bit of a different way than some of the great service providers that we have right now, right? Can it bring new investment? Can it bring kind of more of a just that sense of home from the First Nations themselves? You know, when I went and visited Pekawewin, I've met people from as far away as Regina, Saskatchewan, and Winnipeg, and they just like, their comments to me were like, I don't have a home there, and I feel like I don't have a home here. So how do you just even create that sense of home, right? It all kind of bogs down to the land too. We're all united by land. So that's just one example of how I think an urban reserve can help. It can bring new investment in that regard. It can, like, the First Nations themselves can access specific programs that socioeconomic organizations can't, that the city can't, that the provincial government can't, that they can access from the federal government, even international programs. So, you know, it just brings a new added value, I would say, in addressing some of the poverty that the city of Edmonton goes through, on top of all those other kind of less tougher conversations on top of economic development, right? The second bullet there I'm going to touch at the end. So the First Nation and the city will need to design a bylaw compatibility and services agreement that covers at least the land use and municipal services and boundary protocol. So taxes is a big word. It's a big word for all the Edmontonians, rightfully so, taxes. And it's a big word for First Nations too, because you always hear like First Nations don't pay tax. We actually do pay tax, especially if we're living in the city as well. So on the First Nation though, if it turns into reserve lands, the reserve itself takes over jurisdiction of income taxes. So often there actually aren't no income taxes on reserves. There's different forms of taxes, but specific income tax to Canada doesn't exist on the reserve. In a small way here on Enoch Cree Nation, we don't charge income tax if you're a First Nation member. If you work on the reserve, what we do is we deduct rent, we deduct other services from our members. So, you know, call tax whatever you want it, you just share back into the pot for the broader community, right? So where this is going is I always feel like I have to, I don't think reassure is the right word, but just show Edmontonians that, you know, it's not Enoch, it's not any of the other 16 First Nations from Treaty 6 walking in, and I would say taking from Edmonton. I think all the land our urban reserves are going to see in Edmonton, possibly over the next decade, if it happens, is the First Nations itself will acquire the land at their own cost from their own source funds. It'll be at value, which the city will sell at value, ideally. And then the nation itself won't pay taxes to the city, but they will pay for the costs that it, for the services that the city gives. So it won't be called taxes. It'll just be called a bylaw compatibility agreement and services agreement. So we already have working examples of this. Enoch Cree Nation pays the City of Edmonton for water. We get our water from the E.L. Smith plant over there. And just like all the Edmontonians, we pay the cost of water. We also pay fire services as Enoch Cree Nation for our development just right across 215th Street. And so if we acquired property in the city, we would still have to pay for all of those things as well. We could probably do small, maybe policing. I don't think a First Nation would do policing in an urban reserve. It's too small, it's not feasible. So I really don't see us doing a lot of our own services. We would just pay for the city services at cost like every other Edmontonian. The only one maybe is waste removal. Maybe we would do waste removal on our own. If you picture an urban reserve in Edmonton, let's pick a spot. Let's pick Lessard. That's where I live. Let's say if you're familiar with Lessard, it's west Edmonton. And what's a good spot we can pick for an urban reserve in Lessard or Collingwood? There's not really much there. It's all developed. Let's pick a different one. I'm gonna go with this one. I use name drop this one. So the quarters downtown, eastern downtown, always been talked about being fixed up for a lot of years, and it should be, and it will be over time. But let's just say we turn a small city block of the quarters downtown into an urban reserve. It's not like we can put a refinery there. It's not like we can create a new EPCOR water plant there, or it's not like we could do anything that just doesn't vibe or jive with the zoning of that area, right? So we have to work with the city very much in regard and be good neighbors in development. So I don't think urban reserves is land acquisition, and tomorrow it turns into something that doesn't vibe with its surrounding neighbors. We're just about the end. So this is the proposal I have for the first urban reserve in Edmonton. And it's right there. So there's White Mud Drive and then Anthony Henday. So there's the intersection of that in West Edmonton. I believe this is the Parkland neighborhood or the Grange neighborhood. I think it's the Grange. I should know that, but it's one of the two neighborhoods there. It's a burial site, so it's the final resting place of Chief Jean-Baptiste Lepatak. Now, it's Jean-Baptiste and or his brother Lazarus, who were some of the first leaders of Enoch. Many ancestors of Treaty 6 territory and beyond are buried there. So this actually used to be a part of Enoch. And then Laura touched on Frank Oliver, and I won't go into detail, but very much so, Frank Oliver has open wounds for many of our members and many other Treaty 6 First Nation members. And in 1908 and 1902, from the actions he did as a government official, he wrongfully took a significant portion of First Nations land away from our nation and many other nations across Western Canada. So this used to actually be the reserve itself. Up to, I think, about 184th Street was our western boundary, all the way down to the river. And it totally makes sense because I've seen maps here where Chief Lepatak's house was down in Parkland about a mile away from this. And so this burial ground has been there for a really, really long time. Nobody ever notices it. It's got one monument there behind me as I'm speaking, and it's got a fence around it. And it's just a nice, peaceful place that nobody really bugs. In a weird way, it's in the Tuck corridor. So the Trans Mountain Pipeline's built about 15 or 20 meters away from it, and it wasn't disturbed, so we didn't disturb any graves. Thank Creator for that. So it's just there. And as an act of reconciliation, for for a long time now, well, at least a year and before that, but really kind of gaining momentum over last year, again, through the help of Councillor Hamilton, who just kind of sparked these conversations at the city level that they needed to be, so I really thank her. I propose this as possibly the first urban reserve land acquisition in Edmonton. And so going back to the points I've made earlier, this would not be for development. We would keep it for the gravesite. We do go out there and visit. We do hold ceremonies out there, small ceremony, doesn't disturb the residences. And we would just basically keep it the same way it would be. And it would be a true, really good act of reconciliation. And, you know, given what happened in Kamloops over the last 2 weeks, you know, I got to still do a lot of community consultation with our elders and our community on this one. It won't happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight, but I just, it couldn't be more appropriate right now, right? And I'm just thankful that that there is this window of opportunity to consider this, and I hope it really does happen. So, you know, for Edmonton, you know, Saskatoon does urban reserves in Regina and Winnipeg and Vancouver. Calgary doesn't have one, so let's be Calgary and Tsutina. It would be really, really symbolic. It would be really meaningful if this was the first one. So in the grave site, there's our first chief, our ancestors, but there's also members from as far away as Northwest Territories, because this was kind of used as Edmonton got more settled as like burial grounds for the Inuit who went to the Charles Camsell Hospital and passed away there. So that's really would be a great action by the city, a great action by the province. It's actually technically owned by the province in the top corridor there, but within the city boundary. And it would be a good action for the local residents there. It's in the CP Winiwak ward, which means River Cree. So just a great story to tell, right? There's actually way more history in the city of Edmonton and its boundaries that I hope you can tell these small stories walking here on the trails and everything. So this is one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I was probably going into overtime there. I apologize.
No, it's great. I think that's great, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, Chief Morin. I think it's so important that we really think about, as you said, from these past couple of weeks, you know, understand these places are sacred in some cases, and I recognize that, you know, from the Saskatoon example, it's not always sacred spaces that they're using as urban reserves. And so, you know, I know some of the questions that we received earlier this week was, you know, around how can an urban reserve help Indigenous people and Indigenous businesses to grow and prosper? What is your hope with that? I mean, you talk so much about self-determination. What are your hopes for this with the, you know, beyond the gravesite and beyond that important burial ground? What's those next steps that you're hoping?
Well, my background is the actual Enoch Reserve. It's how it looks as of last year. And visit the River Cree open today, by the way. Sorry, I can't help myself. From Enoch. So these are two commercial buildings behind us. There's an Enoch office in there, and there's about 5 other First Nations that have their head offices for their businesses in there. And so in Edmonton, you know, you got different cultures and ethnicities that kind of have their own, you know, they get together, like you can't help but their family. So, you know, I live in Collingwood, which has a really huge, awesome Jewish community. And then different ethnicities across town have their own little areas, like, and it's cool. Where's the Indigenous one? I think you can say it's a little bit of everywhere, but like, where's the Indigenous one where you know you're just gonna go walk down, you're gonna get a bannock burger, and you're gonna get some Indigenous clothes, or you're gonna meet somebody. I think again, it's a little bit of everywhere. There's no one recognized space. So, you know, I hope urban reserves can help add to that. I also sit on the Explore Edmonton board. So, you know, I'm thinking from the business tourism mindset. And again, like I want to add to the authentic Indigenous experience. And I think an urban reserve would only help that, right?
No, absolutely. And I think, I'll pull out one of the questions that was just showing up in the chat, because I think as community leagues, and you spoke about this earlier, we're so committed to being good neighbors, right? I mean, that is the foundation of what leagues were built on, was building inclusive neighborhoods and really hearing all the voices of the people in the neighborhood. And I think the leagues are really wanting to know, like, what can they do? How can they help? How can they support Enoch as they want to move forward with this urban reserve on the land, on the gravesite specifically? But even further, like how can we help you on this journey?
Well, it's broad. You can help in so many ways. I like giving tangible examples though. So if I'm putting my community league hat on, if lots of people on here are from the community league, you know, I was looking at my community league site, and it was, you know, and Laura was helping me out with a little bit more detail on the community league history and everything and where it's at. And I think I seen a pop-up comment where somebody was like, I don't even know, we wanted to engage in Indigenous business, but it was so hard getting it. And from an Indigenous perspective, not just Enoch too, right? Because there's 80,000 Indigenous people in the City of Edmonton. There's 2,600 Enoch members. So there's way more Indigenous people rather than just Enoch members. How do I build a bridge with the community leagues? I think it's really untapped resource from the Indigenous perspective. I'm sure I have cousins maybe in a few community leagues. And I was Googling it, like the soccer program. Do Indigenous people engage the community league soccer program? Do they engage like the Green Shed programs? So I really just think there's this untapped kind of relationship. And to me, it's more like, if it's the community leagues, what's the first one they would approach? Because I'm sure you guys already do. So the Oliver initiative for renaming is happening. But even beyond the renaming aspect, how can we get the community leagues and the Indigenous community together a little bit more? So I like, again, doing tangible things. So, you know, the Confederacy of Treaty 6 is really more of a political organization. You can, but I don't think they'd necessarily be the best one. I would say you want to take it a little bit more grassroots level. So, man, I'm having trouble with that one. I would just.
I think that's a good answer, and I think, you know, I want to say, Chief Morin, EFCL has a teepee now. We had run a program that we were funded by the federal government, and we moved a teepee around Edmonton because I think what we realized was that there was no place in the neighborhood to have those really frank, honest conversations together about what is a league, what are people's needs are, and specifically what are Indigenous people's needs in the community. So you talk about the soccer program, you talk about Green Check, those are wonderful programs. And I think, how can we ensure that Indigenous people feel welcome to join those and get their kids involved? Because we know when kids come together, adults come together, and those relationships happen on the sidelines, not just on the soccer field, right? And sometimes those are the really important pieces. You know, and I know, you know, leagues are very active politically, and you can see already in the chat, folks are saying, I can talk to my counselor, I want to let them know. And so, you know, I think that's some of the action too that they're looking for is calling us, you know, let me know when there's things that you need help with, because I think this is a sort of relationship we need to have. We do want to serve all the Indigenous people that live in Edmonton. And I don't know if we've done a great job up till now, but we need to change that. We need to start these conversations.
I would be so bold as saying, you know, I'm going to be selfish here a little bit. So learning from Laura and studying up on community leagues can, like, I don't think it would be like in the city's community league to start, but like I love the model, and certainly we can learn off the community. So like, what if Enoch had its own community league for the Enoch Cree Nation, right? Like, and I'm certainly you can just show us how to like organize and from the community and advocate from the community level, even up to the chief of council. So that's a funner conversation, put my political hat on, that I would like to have selfishly too.
Absolutely. I love that idea. And I think definitely we should have those conversations for sure. I think, you know, there's been some questions as well around, just looking through them here, because you've touched on so much, Chief Morin. I don't want to have you, you know, go over some of the questions you've already had, but you know, what would you say is the best way for people from settler backgrounds to support Enoch? So not just community leagues, but Edmontonians in general, you know, and how do it support people from Enoch and the Indigenous populations here in Edmonton in achieving the goals? So going beyond the leagues, what can Edmontonians be doing? How can we be allies with you?
I really believe the city is doing a great job overall. Edmontonians are great people. I'm an Edmontonian too, by the way, of reconciliation, and Mayor Iverson's been a champion of that. And I'm sure the next council, I'm hopeful, will pick it up, or whoever that is. But you Edmontonians are really champions of it. You really are. I don't know how else to put it. So there are just vast amounts of ways to get involved. But I guess from, again, just taking it back to the individual perspective, I wouldn't say just contact, again, Confederacy, like they're a government-to-government organization. You know, we've seen so many support downtown and throughout the last 2 weeks with the 215. Again, the spirit and the yearning is there from every Edmontonian, no matter where you're from or who you are. And I would just keep looking for opportunities. So the next opportunity you're going to get to learn more about Indigenous history. I walked through the Indigenous people's experience. I got chief privilege of walking through it at Fort Edmonton. It is hands down the best Indigenous. It's an experience. Like they added that word, not they added it because you're going to feel something when you walk through there. Kudos to the Royal Alberta Museum downtown, but this is different. You're gonna feel different. You're gonna learn some more different things. And if you're looking for like a really small tangible action, COVID's coming into an end. It's supposed to be the summer of fun. They're opening up in about 2-3 weeks. Go check that out because it was built with local Indigenous real people too, and you're gonna be really amazed. And that's a really cool thing that Edmonton, I think, will be known for internationally. So that's everybody's new assignment is go check out IP at Fort Edmonton.
Love it. Great idea. And I'm so glad to hear that you've had a chance to, have a chance to see it. There's a couple of questions around, and in the chat, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Chief Morin, about being a sovereign nation and negotiating with a municipality. Can you speak a little bit more to that? I think wearing these two hats and feeling like you're connected with the city and yet having this greater relationship with the country.
Yeah, that one's really complicated. One of the best comments I got about myself, well, I took it as a compliment, was from a government official who just said, "You're really pragmatic." And that kind of sounds boring sometimes, but I was like, I'm all about kind of building bridges and doing things instead of just talking about them sometimes. So I really value our relationship with the City of Edmonton, but as I was speaking earlier, I also get heck for it, for lack of a better word, from even my own members, because they have some really long-standing open wounds, right? And they experience racism and they experience a whole bunch of stuff that hurts. So they're very distrusting, and I understand why. But the pragmatic, practical view is that they're also Oilers fans. They also go to the mall. They also shop at the Safeway across the street, and their kids play in White Mud West hockey. And so, I think a lot of things are lost in government bureaucracy with rules in the Indian Act and jurisdiction and Jordan's principle. And my project management brain, that's my background, just says, throw all that aside and let's just get down to kind of real action, which is really simplistic. At the end of the day, it's a relationship, and let's think win-win. That was the ultimate goal of treaty. So I don't get lost in the whole government, Edmonton, Alberta, Enoch thing. I just look for projects, and that's how I push. Kind of, that's how my mindset is as a leader.
Yeah. What do you think, just on this idea of what is your hope that people, you talked about home and you talked about Camp Peekawewin from last summer, what are you hoping that people feel, or that what kind of supports will they feel once they have that urban reserve? What are you hoping to build those connections for and with them? And what's the importance of it being within a city? We've had some more comments about, people not understanding the importance for you around it being in the city. Why is it so important to have that land here inside the city boundaries?
Well, there's 80,000 Indigenous people in the City of Edmonton. That's the number we use, and we do include Métis in that. So there's a subtle difference there. Well, there's a big difference, however you want to define that. But and I have a great relationship with the Métis Nation. But yeah, it honestly just sometimes feels like, from the Indigenous perspective, you're home, but you're not home. And it's not a cliche. Indigenous people are born with a special sense of connection to land. And if they're walking on West Edmonton and they have to look over their shoulder, or because they are being discriminated against, and that happens, not just to Indigenous people, I think if they knew the reserve was, just over there on that side of town. Certainly Enoch has a lot of other Indigenous communities that come out here and do business and just want to be out here. We're lucky that way, and do ceremony out here and walk in the trees behind me and congregate out there. And we're lucky to have that. It's just, they feel a different connection. And right now we can build that for many other First Nations, not just Enoch in the City of Edmonton. That's why it's important.
And belonging is important. I think, as League people, I think we sell membership cards, and there's a power in belonging to your neighborhood. And I think, I hear that in your voice too, that you want people to feel like they belong here, that the city is theirs too, that there's a space for them and a place for them. And I think, we will work with our leagues going forward to say, how can we spread this feeling of belonging and connection to Indigenous people across the city? But I can recognize the need for that land base, that place that people feel like they can come to and feel safe and feel accepted and feel part of. What are the next steps? I know the strategy is being proposed. Where do we go from here in terms of engagement, with Indigenous communities, or understanding what engagement does Treaty 6 nations have, and what engagement are you doing with Edmontonians, and again, how can we help?
Yeah, I think on urban reserve specifically, like I said, you're not going to see an urban reserve in the City of Edmonton. Well, my goal is 365 days, but that's really ambitious, by the way. I'll be selfish for a sec. I would really love to engage the community league specific to the Chief's burial ground. And of course, I know Laura will probably help me with that. And, I would say for everybody on the call, let's keep an eye on that, because we're setting the precedents for maybe other things that'll come down in the years to come, right? So, stay tuned. Maybe I can work with the community leagues over there and the broader organization to share the story and the journey, because again, this hasn't happened in the City of Edmonton, and it's going to be a really cool story to tell. I think it's inevitable you'll see an urban reserve acquisition in the city. I just don't know if it's next year or in 5 or 10 years.
No, absolutely. It's a little bit out of our control, but I think the more that we can, I see some comments around sort of engagement of the community, engagement of, ensuring that everyone knows what's happening and is on board. And I think this report coming to councils is definitely that first step. I think we have a bit of time now that we can sort of address if there's any further questions that are in the chat. So I'm just going to look to Tim and some of my other folks here. Let me just get a couple other ones here. Give me a second. There's been a lot of questions, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to put these in here. I think if we talk about this, we talked a little bit about the sovereign nation and the negotiating with the municipality. How is that, how is that going? Are there other levels of government with that negotiation? Is the federal government part of that table as well?
So I think I took too of a high level answer on that. So thank you for kind of coming full circle on that one. So I'll take a little bit more of a practical answer to that. So we do have a relationship with the City of Edmonton. We have our servicing agreements already. And those are negotiated over time, are contractual for a few years, and then we can renegotiate again, but they're pretty standard. We would pay the equivalent of a taxpayer in Edmonton, broadly speaking. So those have to be negotiated for an urban reserve, and we already set that precedent. For the urban reserve land acquisition, let's use the Chief's burial ground for example. I do have to engage those communities. Like, it's just not tomorrow Billy can walk in and the city signs off that he gets that Enoch gets that plot of land back. I have to engage the community members. I got to give them a space. From the provincial perspective, which the city takes its jurisdiction from, there's a huge play with this particular site, and again, just the city broadly speaking, but that particular plot's actually provincial land within the city boundaries, so they have to also sell it to us through their legal mechanisms. And long story short on that one, I won't reveal too much detail, but that's very much in the works. And then finally, who actually has the last say is the First Nations themselves, because they have to agree to accept that piece of property. But it's the federal government who has ultimate say of granting reserve status to land. So there's a federal legislative practice that's been defined to get additions to reserve recognized under the federal government process. So
Mm-hmm.
We have to go through all three of those levels of government.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount for sure.
Yeah.
You know, another question was just around, you know, someone mentioned as a question, many people don't support this. You know, why are you, Chief Morin, proceeding with this? Why have you decided to move forward with this? And what is your response to those who say that they don't support this?
I do try to put myself in the shoes of other people who don't support it. So I guess if I was a First Nation person, again, I kind of spoke this a little while ago, like, you know, at land, I was talking to a member who I love and respect yesterday, and she was a little bit, she's like, why do we have to get it back? It's already ours. It's already treaty land, which it is, like City of Edmonton Treaty, Enoch Treaty. Why do we have to go through this process? And I'm like, at the end of the day, right now, there's a legal vacuum. We don't have any practical say over that piece of property. In fact, we surrendered it through land claim in 2004. We had $54 million worth of compensation. So in the Canadian legal mechanism and systems, we actually received compensation for that illegal surrender in 1908. So in one way, we can say we were compensated for land being taken away 100 years later, basically, but we did. And she was still really just struggling with, it's still ours, like it's still ours. And I agree with you, it is, it's treaty land, but when the TMX pipeline goes through there and it's in the Tug corridor, I can't guarantee you that we'll have the final say. I can't guarantee you that somebody's gonna block it off for us. I can't guarantee you that somebody's gonna come there and again, it hasn't happened, but I can't guarantee you that band member that somebody's gonna do something that we hope they don't. And if it's turned back into reserve status, we're going to have a lot more say and a lot more protection of our ancestors and our chiefs that are buried there. So that's for that one particular project. And she's wrapping her head around that, and she's still kind of, you know, it's all ours. And she's right. It's marrying these two paradigms is tough. And then the final one from an Edmontonian perspective, I think again it's a lot of education. So, you know, it's like NIMBY. Like Edmontonians should feel free to have their voice in City Hall and say, you, like, for example, I think this is really morbid of me maybe, but there's a crematorium or something being built in the neighborhood and the city residents stopped it for all the right reasons. It's their choice. And so I get it. Like, if you don't want an urban reserve and it's scary and it's the unknown, I can see why you wouldn't want it there. And so that's just really building that relationship over time. Hopefully we can come to an agreement on it. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The relationship still goes ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it comes from first understanding and dialogue, right? We always talk about we need to have the chance for these sort of conversations where we can come and ask the tough questions and then really sort of understand each other's perspectives. Because you're right, they're very strong, and they're very strong advocates for building the neighborhood they want. And we're really trying to encourage leagues all the time to ensure they hear all the voices in that neighborhood. And that's really tough on a group of volunteers who are passionate people. And so our role is to help them as much as we can. But I think it's well taken, is that, you know, it's a very complicated relationship. Is there any risk, you know, just recognizing the time, we're kind of wrapping up here, Chief Morin, but is it, you know, there's been a question about treaty rights, and is there any question that those treaty rights would be put into jeopardy through this process? Would their treaty rights be impacted because they now have other land, or that there's other land that they're accessing? Is there any concern about that? Have you had that asked of you before? Or
I get asked that at me every day. And it's a no. It's just a flat out no. As a leader of a First Nation and somebody who relies upon ceremony and relies upon a lot of Kehteak older people who know about treaty more so than I do, I am beholden. I cannot violate treaty in any way. But I do get how people kind of, again, mix paradigms and are fearful of doing away with treaty rights. It's not something I would ever do. In fact, I see land acquisition as enhancing treaty rights more so than anything. And again, treaty is about sharing at the end of the day. So it's just a flat out no, I would never do anything like that. And this precedent has been set over 100 times across Canada, and there's been nothing legally proven that every time a reserve acquires more land, that it violates treaty. In fact, treaty land entitlement means you're getting more land.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. There's been a few comments from some of the leagues that are your direct neighbors to Enoch, and I hope that you've noted them. They really have, you know, put themselves out there to say, we want to build that relationship. We want to, you know, we're your neighbors with Enoch, with Glastonbury, and I think it was Edgemont. I really think, you know, if we can help build those bridges, you know, we will do that. But I think, you know, I've heard so many positive comments and seen so much positivity from the people here today. And thank you, Chief Morin. You've answered some really tough questions. And I think you're ready for Jesperson. Absolutely, you're ready for Jesperson. But I do want you to have the last couple minutes here. So I'll pass it back to you. And just again, thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Laura, and thanks. I'm gonna walk with a little bit of humility here. My question to Laura was, I do know a little bit about community leagues, but like I asked her just to go into a little bit more depth. So my personal interest is sparked on like, I am an opportunist too, and I am a whole bunch of things in addition to being chief. So what I pride myself on is a bridge builder. So I mean it when I say it. I haven't seen the comments, but if there's community leagues right beside the Enoch, like right here behind me, I am looking forward to that conversation. So I hope I can work through Laura and the organization to set up some gatherings of that type and just see how we can build synergies together. On the urban reserve one, guys, Edmonton really is a reconciliation leader. This city really is. And we're behind a little bit in terms of this urban reserve reconciliation that's been set across over 100 times across Canada. And so, you know, I like doing things that nobody ever done. So as Enoch and as the other 60 nations, as the City of Edmonton, I really just want to get one done. I'm selfish that way. But I hope getting one done, or just the story that evolves over the next little while, is we're going to be all better for this. I think that's pretty clear for the over 100 precedents that have been set across other municipalities across Western Canada, and we can build upon that reconciliation champion that I already mentioned Edmonton as, and we can catch up really quick, and we can do even something maybe even more special than those cities are already doing. So just thanks for giving me the opportunity. So Eminan Gakya Nuwaku Maganak. Just blessings upon you, all my relations, and just really thanks for the opportunity to share with you today.
Awesome, and thank you, Chief Morin. I know that some folks feel that we didn't get to all their questions, and I do apologize. I did try to pull out some of the themes of the questions that I was seeing. So we're really hoping, you know, that this can be the beginning of more conversations. I recognize an hour is way too short to have you know, such in-depth conversation. So please stay tuned. We'll work with Chief Morin to see how we can maybe continue this over the summer and the fall, and just really ensure that everyone feels like they have a chance to ask the questions of leagues, of the chief. You know, Chief, there's been a few people that have asked if there's a way that they can get a hold of you. What would be the best way that they can be in touch if they, you know, have further questions? Is there, you know, an email, or what's the best way?
I'm a Facebook guy. You can add me on Facebook, and I do try to get to as many messages on Facebook. And then what I'll do is I'll give you my email too. Please be patient though. I do run a small nation and a whole bunch of other things, but I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And if I don't, I certainly have an awesome staff who's one sitting right beside me here watching over me. So we'll try to get in touch. And then I of course, Laura, I would really just want to follow up with the community leagues. And of course, maybe we'll have another opportunity for this as well. So my email is billy.morin@enochnation.ca. And also we can see if we can follow up with Laura for some more contacts in that way.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll pop that in the chat for folks. It was billy.morin@enochnation.ca. Great. And thanks to everyone. We will be making this recording, will be available likely as of tomorrow, and we will send it to everyone that's been registered, and it'll be up on our EFCL website as well. So thank you again, Chief Morin. It's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you. And thank you to everyone here on the call for taking your lunch hour to share with us and be here with us and learn and unlearn and walk this journey together. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.